Welcome everybody. I am Conley Woods. This is TCGplayer.com, bringing you another brew this week. Last week, if you were here, we brought you a red-black deck based around this little robotic werewolf down here, Lupine Prototype. Two mana 5/5 that can't attack or block unless any player has no cards in their hand. So last week we explored a deck where we actively tried to get rid of our own hand. We used Asylum Visitor. We used Asylum Visitor, which was another incentive for us to have no hand and would draw us cards. Also has Madness, so it just worked well with discard type effects. We used Bloodhall Chief. Is that the name of it? Bloodhall. Boom. Bloodhall Priest, sorry. Which also, if you have no cards in hand, will shock things. And the deck was overall kind of interesting, a lot of Madness cards, but it didn't play very well. It was mostly just a fun list. But the thing about brewing, especially around a card like Lupine Prototype, is you're rarely backed into a single corner. This card very specifically gives you the option of having your opponent have no cards in hand or you having no cards in hand. And while either of those scenarios could just come up in a natural state in a game where your opponent just runs out of cards or you just run out of cards, if you're trying to build a deck around one of those abilities, you probably want to focus on one. Last week we focused on discarding our own hand. Didn't turn out too well, so I figured, you know what? Let's not stop the brewing there. Let's give this other guy's half a little bit of a try, and let's try to make our opponents discard their hand. So obviously we go a very different direction where we are including very different cards for very different reasons, and the main card that we're picking up in this particular configuration is Tormented Thoughts. Tormented Thoughts is the closest thing you have to a full-on mind twist, I guess, is the best way to describe it. A way to actually get rid of most of your opponent's hand. There are plenty of good single-card discards in the format. There's even a couple of cards that make people discard 2 cards, but there's really no way to get mass discard or a mind twist effect outside of Tormented Thoughts. The good news is, Tormented Thoughts asks you to sacrifice a creature. It checks that creature's power, and then your opponent discards cards equal to that power. And Lupine Prototype down here has the unique characteristics of having 2 mana cost and being a 5/5, so they're discarding 5 cards with Tormented Thoughts. It's also a useless card if you don't have something like Tormented Thoughts to feed it too early, because both players are going to have a lot of cards. So it kind of just sits around doing nothing for a long time, making it a great candidate to sacrifice. And then furthermore, once your opponent does discard 5 cards, it's very likely that all future Lupine Prototypes, including potentially one that you sacrificed if you get it back like a Colligan's command, they're almost always going to be turned on after that. So Tormented Thoughts, Lupine Prototypes are kind of the 2 key elements of the deck. Maybe call the deck like Tormented Lupine or something, I don't know. Tormented Prototype. But then we have a lot of role players that fill in here. Asylum Visitor does double duty. Last week it was here because our opponent, or us having no cards in hand, would draw us a card. Now our opponents having no cards in hand will draw us a card. Still great. Also a reasonable card to sacrifice to Tormented Thoughts. While you rarely want to use 2 cards to make your opponents discard just 3 cards, sometimes you do, and so that option's available to you. 2 power 3/1 is at least slightly above curve in that regard. 4 Duress, pretty generic. I need to fix this. I got 3 different types of duresses here. Some Vorthos right now is just ripping their hair out. They cannot stand watching this video. I apologize to you, my friend. I'll get those fixed after, probably not till after the match, just because I'm lazy. But 4 Duresses in here, specifically looking to get cards that would break up our combo, which is excellent. Being able to probe the opponent before we go 2-drop into Tormented Thoughts, and making sure they don't have a way to, for example, unsubstantiate would just completely destroy us, because we would lose our Lupine Prototype and have to bounce our Tormented Thoughts, which is now very likely to be dead because we don't have another creature, and that would just be terrible. So Duress is great in here for that. Also 1/1, discard is fine. And yeah, not much else to say. Everyone knows about Duress. Better than Transgress the Mind, because it costs 1 in this spot. At 2, we already talked about Silent Visitor. We know Collective Brutality, which also pulled weight last week. It makes our opponent discard cards, which is great. We also can discard our own cards for when we draw extra Harmless Offerings, which we'll get to in a second, extra Tormented Thoughts. Obviously, our Madness creatures, because of Asylum Visitor, has Madness. But yeah, just being another form of duress, another way for our opponents to get some cards out of their hand, and a very, very versatile card just makes Collective Brutality awesome in this list. Fury Blade Vampire probably looks pretty strange to a lot of you, and rightly so. I'm giving it a chance because it is the next best possible 2-drop to feed Tormented Thoughts to. Granted, it's not the most attractive. You generally spend 2 mana, you play your Fury Blade Vampire, you untap, you discard a card. Hopefully it's a useless card, but you discard a card nonetheless. You attack them for 4, and then post-combat you Tormented Thoughts, making your opponent discard 4. Discarding 4 is obviously worse than discarding 5, and the fact you have to feed 2 cards into this to get it to work is obviously worse than feeding a single card. So it's not like Fury Blade Vampire is like amazing, but it's the next best option. It's the next highest possible power, and I really wanted to focus on this Tormented Thoughts, Fury Blade Vampire, Tormented Thoughts 2-drop combination, and with only Lupine Prototype, I think it's just too inconsistent. So I'm giving Fury Blade Vampire a shot. I think it's a reasonable card for Constructed. A 2 mana 4/2 trample is like fine. We often have plenty of extra cards to discard to it that are bad, like Duresses when our opponent has no cards in hand, extra Harmless Offerings, extra Tormented Thoughts, Madness cards on Asylum Visitors, extra lands, you name it, cards we can't cast, etc. So I'm giving him a shot. He's certainly the card I'm most skeptical of in the list. At 3, we have Tormented Thoughts we talked about. We have Colligan's Command, which is great. Makes your opponent discard a card at instant speed, so you can deny them a draw step. Blowing up artifacts is fine. 2 damage is great, of course. And specifically, this is great in that you can rebuy your Lupine Prototype after you sacrifice it to Tormented Thoughts to give you more opportunities at 2 mana 5/5s. And we have 3 Harmless Offerings, which obviously combine with 4 Demonic Pacts. While we can certainly win with Lupine Prototypes and Fury Blade Vampires and Asylum Visitors, I felt like Demonic Pact did enough in this deck that I wanted to run it anyway. Makes your opponent discard 2 cards, which works with our deck, of course. Draws us cards, and we really don't have a big draw engine outside of Asylum Visitor, which is unreliable. Kills creatures, larger creatures, and gains life. Both those things are pretty nice. And the entire combo of Demonic Pact fits in this nice little 2-color combination, which we're already running. So it just felt like a perfect opportunity. So 3 Harmless Offerings, 4 Demonic Pacts, 2 Dark Petitions, which round out that little combo. Dark Petition can be used to find either of these. And if you have a 4th mana, so if you have 6 total mana, you can either play the Demonic Pact immediately, or you can Harmless Offering immediately. Because you need a red, of course, to work with the triple black. But it makes this combo pretty easy to assemble generally as the game goes along. And you can also use Dark Petition to do other things. You could just find the Tormented Thoughts with it and sacrifice things right away. You can, do whatever. 1 Goblin Dark Dwellers. This is the sort of rebuy. The idea is that it rebuys. You can either play it immediately, rebuy Tormented Thoughts, sacrificing itself to make your opponent discard 4 cards for 5 mana, which felt pretty cool. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. You can get some of the Collective Brutality, of course. You can Harmless Offering after you've run out, or if you just need an extra copy. It does work like that. And then it's the most impressive thing it can do is almost always going to be Colligan's Command, because you can rebuy. Well, I guess with only 1 in the deck, it targeting Colligan's Command is not great, but Colligan's Command rebuying Goblin Dark Dwellers is great. So keep that in mind. 1 Chandra Flamecaller in here in the main deck. Again, Dark Petition can find it. It is an expensive card, but I think it's worth having a 1 of in here. So far, it's been pretty good in all my testing, so we'll pay attention to it. The sideboard is, I think, pretty well thought out. We have 3 Cletus, which I've basically been including in every black deck going on right now. Exiling things is huge. Black gaining life is huge, and we also just have some vampires in here that just can be sacrificed to this naturally. 1 Ruinous Path. I think when you have a couple Dark Petitions, it's worth including something like this, just because it's such a great tutor target, because you can cast it immediately. 4 Languish to help us out against aggro. We can really easily morph into a control deck. We basically take out some amount of this little package, the Tormented Thoughts, Lupine, probably Fury Blade Vampire more than Lupine, but some amount of that package. And we bring in things like Languish, additional Harmless Offerings possibly, Obnixilis, additional Chandras, additional Goblin Dark Dwellers, Pick the Brain. All these cards really allow us to become more of a control deck if we need to. We're sort of controlling in the main deck, but we have an aggressive edge to us, which I think is best to to supplement the early discard because we disrupt our opponents a little bit and then try to punish them for it. But if we need to, against most of the creature decks, we can morph out of that pretty easily and turn into this control deck with Kalitas and Languish and Planeswalkers and all that stuff. Pick the Brain, pretty obvious. We can actually get Delirium pretty easily. We have artifacts in our deck. We have Planeswalkers. We have enchantments. We have lands that go there naturally, instants and sorceries, and then creatures, of course. So this card turns out being pretty good a lot of the time. I'm not sure about the fourth Harmless offering. I don't know if we need it. Maybe this should be a third Dark Petition, for example. But the idea was when we really need to go all in on Demonic Pact, we can. And yeah, otherwise, outside of that, there's not much interesting to talk about. I skipped the lands because they're very, very boring. Just super straightforward. 2 Cinder Barons, 4 Evolving Wilds, 4 Foreboding Ruins, 4 Smoldering Marsh, 3 Mountains, and a bunch of Swamps. Really not that exciting. There is not much going on here. Most exciting thing is the spells, which we've already covered. So that is that. That is the deck. I'm pretty excited to give this a shot. Like I said, it's pretty much the exact opposite of what we were working with last week. Not exact opposite. We're using a lot of the same cards, but the opposite side of Lupine Prototype. We're seesawing it and teeter-tottering it or whatever. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. We'll be right back. For TCGplayer.com, I'm Conley Woods. Thank you guys for watching.